You know, Daniel, while I was organizing the kitchen shelves this morning and trying to decide what ingredients we should use for dinner tonight, I suddenly realized how cooking is actually a lot like life itself, because every recipe requires patience, careful preparation, and sometimes a little creativity when things don't go exactly the way we planned.
That is actually a really interesting way to look at it, because I've always thought cooking was simply about following instructions step by step, but the more I spend time in the kitchen experimenting with different ingredients and flavors, the more I realize that it's also about understanding balance, timing, and even trusting your instincts when something feels slightly off.
Exactly. And I think that's why so many people feel intimidated by cooking at first, because they imagine that every dish needs to be perfect, but in reality the kitchen is one of the best places to learn through trial and error, where even mistakes can turn into surprisingly delicious discoveries.
That reminds me of the first time I tried to cook pasta completely on my own without any help, because I was so focused on preparing the sauce that I completely forgot about the pot of water boiling on the stove, and by the time I remembered, the pasta had become so soft that it practically fell apart when I tried to serve it.
I can imagine how frustrating that must have felt at the time, but honestly those early mistakes are often the most memorable parts of learning something new, because they teach us lessons that we rarely forget the next time we step into the kitchen.
You're absolutely right about that, because after that experience I started paying much more attention to timing, and now whenever I cook pasta I set a timer and stay nearby so I can check the texture before it becomes overcooked.
That's actually a great habit to develop, because cooking really is about paying attention to small details, whether it's the color of vegetables as they saute in the pan, the aroma of spices as they warm up in oil, or the subtle change in texture that tells you a dish is ready to serve.
Speaking of vegetables, I was thinking that maybe we could prepare something simple but flavorful tonight, like a vegetable stir-fry with garlic, ginger, and a light soy sauce, because it's quick to cook and it always tastes fresh and satisfying.
That sounds like a wonderful idea, especially because stir-fry dishes allow you to combine so many different ingredients in creative ways, and they also give you the opportunity to experiment with flavors while keeping the cooking process relatively simple.
One thing I've always admired about experienced cooks is how they seem to move around the kitchen with such confidence, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and adjusting flavors almost instinctively without needing to constantly check a recipe.
I think that confidence comes from spending a lot of time in the kitchen and becoming familiar with how different ingredients behave when they are cooked, because once you understand those patterns, it becomes much easier to improvise and trust your judgment.
That makes sense, and I suppose it's similar to learning any other skill, where the more you practice, the more natural it becomes, even though it might feel awkward or confusing in the beginning.
Yes, and the kitchen is actually a wonderful place to practice patience and creativity at the same time, because every meal you prepare is an opportunity to try something new, refine your technique, and discover flavors you might never have expected to enjoy.
You know, I've also noticed that cooking together like this makes the process much more enjoyable than cooking alone, because while we're chopping ingredients or stirring something on the stove, we also get the chance to talk, share ideas, and simply enjoy each other's company.
I completely agree with that, because some of my favorite memories with friends and family come from moments spent in the kitchen, where everyone is helping in small ways while conversations flow naturally and the aroma of food slowly fills the room.
And there's something really satisfying about sitting down to eat a meal that you prepared together, because it feels like the food carries a little bit of the time, effort, and laughter that went into making it.
That's very true, and I think that's one of the reasons homemade meals often taste better than restaurant food, even when the recipe is simple, because the experience of preparing it together adds a special kind of meaning to the meal.
By the way, while you were talking earlier about cooking being similar to life, it made me think about how both require a willingness to experiment and accept that not everything will go perfectly the first time.
Exactly, and just like in cooking, sometimes the unexpected moments in life lead to the most interesting and rewarding outcomes, especially when we remain open to learning and adapting along the way.
That's actually a really comforting thought, because it reminds us that mistakes and surprises are not necessarily problems, but simply part of the process of growing and improving.
And maybe that's the real beauty of cooking and life in general, the idea that every attempt, every adjustment, And every shared moment contributes to something meaningful that we can appreciate in the end.